Alright, I'm Paul Mitchell, how you doing? And this is a deck tech for Grixis Tempo. So this is coming straight off the back of the Magic Online League that Isaac Egan organised, where he incentivized 20 people, or more people, but there are incentives for the top 20, the first 20 people, to make deck techs and other similar videos describing decks for 7 Point Highlander. So I figured I would jump right on the wagon with Grixis Tempo, which is my pet deck. I've been iterating on it since about 2 or 3 years ago when Rug Tempo was like extremely dominant. And I thought that black was just a better choice than green in those style of decks. So it's basically like a base blue-black mid-rangey shell. And replacing the green, you've got things like Tasiga as a replacement for Hooting Mandrills. You've got Gurmag Angler, which is a replacement for Tarmogoyf. Scourge of the Skyclaves as another giant creature that does green things quite well. Dark Confidant as a cheap creature, a cheap threat to get out there. And I think this is a really strong deck. I would take it into a lot of fields. And the only thing it really has to worry about is like mid-range. Which is a strange thing to say because there are a lot of mid-range decks in Highlander, but like Questing Beast, Tarmogoyf strategies can be a trouble for this deck. But otherwise, you're just playing a very strong blue-black shell with some excellent red cards. So let's go through the points first. We've got Strip Mine and Wasteland as 3 points. We're playing a tempo strategy, think Legacy Delver. The land destruction is quite good. Force of Will, spending cards on tempo, very strong. Jace the Mind Sculptor. This is a new point setup that I'm trying after Time Walk went to 5 points. I no longer think Time Walk is good. But you've also got Snapcaster and Lutri in the sideboard. Lutri as your companion is outrageously strong. You should definitely be playing Lutri if you're in these colours. And over here, this is the maybe board pile. I have played Time Walk before. I thought it was an interesting choice at 4 points. It was doable. It was actually pretty strong. 5 points, maybe it's still good, but I don't want to own one in real life. So I am happy to just leave that alone for now. If any of these cards, and possibly others, take your fancy, feel free to muck around with it in your own Grixis Tempo lists. But these are the ones that have not made the cut. I've got my 60 and my 15 right here. So yeah, all our points are about disrupting the opponent or putting good clocks into play, getting some value. Good, blue things. Let's take a look through the deck. So there's 21 lands, which is actually slightly high for this type of strategy, but it is playing the Strip Mine and the Wasteland, as I said. And then it's also playing Creeping Tar Pit and Fiery Islet as flood protection. So I'm actually a big fan of playing one more land than kind of feels right, especially when you're playing like the land destruction lands. You'll very rarely flood out in this deck. There are ways to get rid of cards. You're looting away with Jace. You're shuffling away with Jace or actual Brainstorm. You're putting Lutri in your hand on a turn where you draw a bunch of lands, so when you do top deck a Ponder, you can then, you've spent 3 on the Lutri, and then you spend 4 on Ponder, Lutri, copy Ponder, and then you've got a lot of lands to cast those spells. It's quite good to actually have plenty of lands. So I think 21 is the correct number for this deck. You'll see some people in tempo lists try and push it way, way down, but I think if you end up in that situation, you get in a lot of spots where you're preordaining to put spells on the bottom and keeping land. And I think you'd rather be flush on lands and then do something like preordain to bottom lands in the late game and keep spells. So I'm a big fan of playing 21. So there are a few forces that are acting on card choices in this deck that you should be aware of if you're looking to build this style of deck. The first one I'll mention is the number of delve spells, or things that rely on the graveyard. So in this deck, I have 3 cards with specifically delve. So that's Tasiga, Gurmag Angler, Ethereal Forager. Dig Through Time, I guess. Dig Through Time is really good. It's very strong. I'm going to put it over here in the maybe pile. You should definitely consider playing Dig Through Time. I wouldn't play the 4th delve spell. I think even with the support of Mental Note and Thought Scour, you really don't want the 4th delve spell. I think that's just too much of a tax on the graveyard. You're not going to be able to play out these threats in the early game and pressure your opponent with them. There are games where you play like a 4-mana Gourmet Gangler and it's good enough, but you don't want that to be par for the course. You don't want that to be the expected case. So I like 3 Delve spells, and I like these particular threats. Tasker and Gourmet Gangler have seen plenty of Eternal play. I think people are familiar with these cards well enough. The Ethereal Forager, if you don't know this one, is a powerhouse. So this is well worth the spot, and partly the reason why I'm not playing Dig Through Time is because I'm a strong buyer on Ethereal Forager. It's 0 points, Dig Through Time is 2 points. I can spend my points somewhere else and spend my Delve salary cap on Ethereal Forager. The other strong influencing factor is Dreadhorde Arcanist. So basically when I started this deck, I really wanted to build a good Dreadhorde Arcanist deck. I love this card. I think it's fantastic. I think it's like a Dark Confidant, but it also, instead of just putting the card in your hand, it also gives you the mana to cast it. Like, it's giving you a mana every turn in addition to casting a spell every turn. It's just bonkers. And there, you know, if you're starting from a place of, I want to make a really good Dreadhorde Arcanist deck, the 2 things need to happen. You need to care about attacking, because if you're a control deck, trying to attack with Dreadhorde Arcanist is going to be quite bad. And you need to have, obviously, a high density of cheap spells. I think the best way to do that is to play Grixis, because you have tons of these cantrips, including, of course, Mental Note and Thought Scour, which fuel the Dreadhorde Arcanist quite nicely. Red, obviously you're in red because of Dreadhorde Arcanist, but that gives you Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning as great things to either go face and close out a game quickly, or taking care of creatures, killing small creatures. I love the bolt effects, like Chain Lightning and Bolt, because they're good against like elves or something. You just take out an elf. Or against control, they're not dead, you can shoot planeswalkers. Against combo, you just go face. So they're really flexible, really good. Chain Lightning's worse than Bolt, but you play both. And then where do you go from there? Black gives you Fatal Push, Thoughtseize, Inquisition. And I think that's the thing that tips it over into playable. But I'm actually also playing Reanimate. This is a tip from like blue-black Death Shadow in Legacy, where they would, you know, cycle away a Street Wraith and then reanimate it on turn 1, or just reanimate Death Shadows in the late game. Even reanimating a Gourmet Gangler is extremely strong, you know, if they're not pressuring your life total. So Reanimate is just another threat, basically. I've played against Angus, you know, CBR, MTG Angus, and done things like reanimate, you know, these giant creatures out of his deck, or just, you know, you kill someone's Hex Drinker and then you reanimate it and you start leveling it up. You can do all sorts of stuff. So Reanimate's fantastic, and also gets flashback with Arcanist. So off the top of my head, I think there's 11? 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 with Reanimate. So plenty to get the Dreadhorde Arcanist going. And if you look in the sideboard, there's obviously cards you would want to flashback there as well. So we've got our 3 Delve spells, we've maximized on our Dreadhorde Arcanist, and the good thing about maximizing on Dreadhorde Arcanist is it's not like, it's just 1 out of 60 cards, why am I focusing so much on this card? The fact that you've got all these cheap spells, it works great with Young Pyromancer, it works great with Snapcaster Mage, it works great with Seagate Stormcaller, which was A+ when Time Walk was in the deck. Now it's still a good card, but without copying Time Walk, it's less busted, it's just good. Opposition Agent makes it into the deck, it's just strong enough. Hull Breacher I don't even have in the 75 at the moment. I don't think you need it. I think you could play it in this deck if you're expecting lots of like cantrippy blue decks or Skull Clamp decks or whatever. Like it's certainly in the conversation, but I don't have it in the 75 at the moment. It's also good against like combo-y wheel decks. Maybe it's good enough to be in the sideboard. All of these cards that are on the screen right now, especially... hang on, I need to get up. There we go. Okay, all of the cards you see on the screen right now are cards that I would consider playing in Hard. So just because it's over here doesn't mean I think it's trash. And speaking of threats, Delver of Secrets was a recent cut from this deck. I think playing a turn 1 Delver and hoping to go the distance is not a strategy that's worked for me. Maybe your mileage is a little bit different, but personally I like the value threats as opposed to the cheap threats. For a similar reason, Goblin Guide is a card that I have played in this deck before and have swiftly cut. You don't want this kind of like repeatable lava spike type creature, even with the cost of a land. Burn can get away with it because you're killing them super quickly. This deck, you want threats that will win the game on their own, and you control the game around them. So if you have a look at the kinds of threats that are here, we've got like some value threats like Snapcaster Mage, Deathrite Shaman, Seagate Stormcaller. They're going to get you a little bit of value, so that you're not going to win the game straight off the back of them. Cards like Scourge, Dark Confidant, Dreadhorde Arcanist, Young Pyromancer, Ethereal Forager, any of the Delve spells really, the flash flying threats that you can play at instant speed and get past blockers. All of these guys will win the game for you. Delver doesn't quite crack into that category. It's a 1-mana 1/1 fairly often. If you draw it late, it's a bit worse. It gets no value. These guys can get you value. And you actually don't need that many threats. I think Reanimate is a better 1-mana threat than Delver of Secrets, for sure. So the way the games often play out is turn 1, you're playing one of your 1-mana spells. You're very rarely playing a threat. It's basically just Deathrite Shaman. You're playing like a setup spell, or you're shaping your opponent's hand, or you're killing your opponent's creature. You're just like, controlling the game, getting it to be in the position that you want it. Sometimes you have a very Jund opening where you go like turn 1 Inquisition, turn 2 Dark Confidant, and that's great. But more frequently you go like turn 1 some kind of cheap spell, turn 2 maybe a counter spell, turn 3 is where you really start to pop off and you go like Bob with Spell Pierce backup, or bolt your guy into Jace and suddenly like the board has totally switched. And then when they try and do something, you daze or you use one of your forces. It's really like, or turn. You sometimes have games where you go like turn 1 fetch land Thought Scour, turn 2 fetch land Gurmag Angler, and you just you slam this giant threat really quickly. But more often is you spend the first couple of turns playing some spells, and then turn 3 you play a very cheap Tasiga, or you interact with them a bunch. On turn 4 you play Ethereal Forager, pick up the spells out of the graveyard, and interact more. So it's all about playing this giant threat and winning the game with it. And that's pretty much all there is to it. You're keeping the opponent off balance a little bit. You don't need to counter everything. There's only 8 counter spells in this deck with a couple of discard spells. You're just keeping them off balance enough that one of your massive creatures will win. Very frequently, you resolve a Scourge of the Skyclaves, a Tasiga, a Gurmag Angler, and they're so huge they dominate the board, and you just win quite easily off that. Other times, it's an Ethereal Forager getting you value, or a Dark Confidant getting you value, Arcanist, Young Pyromancer like flooding the board, these guys flying over the top. Opposition Agent is basically like a value creature. Ideally it cantrips when it comes into play, essentially. And Jace the Mind Sculptor's in that camp as well. If you can play that and protect it with a Force or a Daze or something, or a Mental Misstep, then this will win the game on its own as well. So you really are looking to, in the early game, control the shape of the game. Turns 3 or 4, deploy a threat with some kind of backup, like a Spell Pierce or a Spell Snare, or a Daze. And then if you can ride that to victory, then you're good. And quite often, when you get behind in a game, which can happen, you're playing tempo, you might top deck a Stifle when your opponent's top decking a Chandra Torture Defiance or something like that. You transition into essentially a Price of Progress combo deck. So somewhat often, like you get overpowered in the mid game, and your game plan at that point is, I'm a Price of Progress deck. I'm going to get some amount of damage in, and I'm just going to dig for this guy. Of course, you can still try and grind the game out with Lutri. So that's pretty much it for the deck. I think all of these are like fairly conventional choices. I don't think there's anything else that bears talking about. I think these cards are all kind of doing a unique thing. They're not really in a pile. That's just the pile of unique effects. I think these are all self-explanatory. I'll talk about the sideboard a little bit. So all the blasts are fantastic with Dreadhorde Arcanist, but also any of your things that care about cheap spells or multiple spells. Death's Shadow is here mostly for aggro. So if you've got an opponent that's attacking you on the ground, Death's Shadow is a fantastic blocker. It does some very strange things with the like state-based action rules. So you might be in a situation where your Death Shadow's a 2/2 and they attack with 2 3/3s. You block one of that's a bad example, I guess. Say it's a 3/3 and they have 2 3/3s attacking you. You assign Death Shadow as a blocker, but you take the other 3 damage. Their 3/3 dies. Your Death Shadow lives because now it's a 6/6 with 3 damage marked on it. It's extremely good as a defensive creature. You can deploy it for a single black mana, and if your opponent's actively trying to get your life total down, you're not trying to kill your own life total. They'll do it for you. So this is a wall. Think of it that way, and I think you'll be set. It's also pretty sick with price progress. You can have games in this deck where I've definitely like turn 2 Scourge, turn 3 Bolt Face attack, and then like attack again and price of progress before damage, and they're just dead. It's much harder to get Death Shadow going in that regard. So think of it as an anti-aggro wall type creature, and you might actually find success in other archetypes putting this card in your sideboard as well. Duress, another great card with Young Pyromancer, with Dreadhorde Arcanist, etc. Great against combo control. Flusterstorm kind of fits in that category, same kind of thing. This one less good with Arcanist. Magma Spray and Pillar of Flame are both good against red-black aggro, getting rid of creatures and keeping them exiled. They're also good against things like Elves, where you don't want to cantrip on turn 1, you want to kill a creature on turn 1. Any kind of aggro deck these are fantastic against, but specifically the Exile Clause is there with like black creatures in mind especially. Grim Lavamancer is great in those kind of matchups as well, and the last one for those... Well, actually, not the last one. Dystopia is a slept-on card. This card's ridiculous. It can kill your own Deathrite Shaman, that's the downside, but it also kills Choke, it kills Sylvan Library, it kills all sorts of things. It kills their Planeswalkers. It just sits there and chews away at their board, and if they choose not to play into it, and you pay 4 life, and then they just don't play anything, and it just sits there, you're happy to pay another 5 life and just keep them from playing to the board, because you're going to kill them. So Dystopia is a sick card. And then Liliana, the Last Hope, also good against red-black aggro. Just keeps small creatures off the board. You probably bring this in against control as well. You bring it in a lot of places. It's like your go-to, I'm getting a little grindier post-board kind of card. Nihil Spellbomb, fantastic against combo. Less good against red-black aggro. There's a lot of other choices in this sideboard. And Submerge, I think, is the best card in Highlander. Nah, that's probably too hyperbolic. I think Submerge is one of the best cards in Highlander. Practically every deck should be playing this. If you have islands in your deck, play Submerge. Never leave home without it. It's so good against so many things. It's incredible against lands. It kills the Marit Lage. It kills their Ramunap Excavator. It kills like everything out of their deck that you want to care about. You can bring it in against Thassa's Oracle, even the dedicated combo-y Thassa's Oracle decks, because when they go to combo, after their like Tainted Pact or Demonic Consultation are resolved, you can put the Thassa's Oracle back on top for 0 mana. They won't win the game, and they could draw it and cast it again next turn, but you actually get a chance to then like untap and have your mana ready and all sorts of stuff. So it's when you're anti-green or anti-mid-range, like you just hit a Leovold or in a against a bug deck, hitting their Uro, all sorts of stuff. It's just fantastic. It's good everywhere. Play Submerge. Now, some of the cards that didn't make the cut, but I have played before. Mystical Dispute. I've played Main Deck Pyroblast. I played Main Deck Pyroblast, I think, at the second round of the Magic Online League, because I was expecting a lot of blue decks. If you're less cavalier than that, to put it lightly, you can play Mystical Dispute. If you expect blue decks to be at least half the field, this is just a straight upgrade over something like Malik. So you can play a Mystical Dispute and not feel too bad about yourself. Speaking of which, I'm surprised. Maybe I should find space for Mana Leak in this deck. That seems like a pretty strong card. I would definitely consider playing Mana Leak in this deck. In fact, I'm kind of looking for a cut for it right now. Maybe even the 21st land. Hull Breacher, as I said, is strong and fits the strategy quite well. I think Hull Breacher is good when you're attacking, when you're playing at instant speed. You just want the ability to be on when you're actually playing it, because it's quite bad at blocking. Delver of Secrets I talked about. Mask of Intolerance, this is a great one. If you're sick of losing to 4-color mid-range, put Mask of Intolerance in your sideboard. This is like a one-sided Mega Sulfuric Vortex, and it's quite difficult to beat this card. There are tons of answers. The 4-color deck might play like Abrupt Decay or Colligan's Command or something like that, but then they're not using it on one of your other threats. This is a very potent card. Hymn to Turak, I actually haven't played a lot in this deck. As you can see, I've tried to avoid double costs whenever I can. Possibly Hymn to Turak belongs in the sideboard. I've got Liliana and Dystopia in the sideboard, but Hymn doesn't strike me as a sideboard card. Although now that I say that doesn't really have a justification to it. I could see playing it in the sideboard. But you want to stick to mostly double blue cards. There's no double red or double black in the main deck. That's why it's not there. Miscast, It's interesting. I want to like it, but I never have. I have played it as like bad Flusterstorm. Yeah, I'm not a fan. There's other choices you could make. And Nullrod probably deserves to be in the main deck. I think a lot of people are on artifact decks at the moment. Did I say main deck? I meant sideboard. Probably cutting like maybe a Grim Lavamancer. These are the kind of things you can do based on the meta. But Nullrod's quite strong. So that's pretty much it. I've talked for about 20 minutes about one of my favorite decks, Grixis Tempo. If you have any comments, any things you would change, any things you would shuffle around, like in the 20 minutes of talking about this deck, I've already got some ideas of what I would change about this list. So don't think this as some immutable 75. I change it all the time. I change it when I see someone walk in the room at F&M. I'm like, ooh, hang on, before we start, I'm going to like put this Nullrod in my deck for sure. Or like Jared walks in and I'm like, whoop, let's get this Fairy Macabre in there. So it's constantly changing, but these are the kind of cards that are in the discussion. If you keep the strategy and the shell the same, I think you'll find Grixis Tempo is quite strong at battling against control and taking out... It feasts on combo. It's extremely good against combo. Less good against like green mid-range decks. So, thank you very much, and I look forward to watching your deck tech videos.